welcome back to the Healthtech Pigeon podcast, brought to you by Somex, where we break down the health tech news every single week. My name is Jessica, and I am joined today by my co-founder, colleague, husband, James Somaru. How are you doing, James? Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm doing well. We've had a heck of a few weeks. Looking forward to talking about health. Yeah, what a week that was.
I know, yeah. Well, I think the last time we were on this podcast, or certainly I was on this podcast, I was talking about the fact that we'd had a hiatus and that we were back, and then we've had another hiatus again. So no more hiati? Is that plural of hiatus? No more hiati planned for a while. So we are back pigeoning. This week we thought that, of course, we're going to talk about some news stories, but we've come back from health, again full of energy, excitement, unicorn sparkles. So why not do a bit of a debrief? LinkedIn is amok with health roundups, health reflections, waxing lyrical about how great a time we all had in Amsterdam. So we thought that why not do an audio roundup for you all, and you can all just be a fly or pigeon on the wall perhaps, as James and I talk about some of our highlights, some of what we enjoyed and what we're looking forward to for next year. So James, how does that sound?
Sounds good to me.
Why don't we start with the airport? We landed in Amsterdam and basically health managed to break the airport. The flight was on time, unusual for airlines at the moment. But as we arrived at the airport, we were greeted with I don't know how long we stood in the queue. I was watching Bridgerton, so it went quite quickly for me. But it was about an hour and a half queue, I would say. And along the way, there are a few sort of health signs. So that was nice to kind of welcome us there. But I'm pretty sure it was health that was responsible for that hold up before we got through passport control. But maybe the Schiphol airport are going to have a heads up for next year to know that they need to put more staff on their passport control to get us through much more quickly, because unfortunately that resulted in us missing some of the day zero activities, the ideation sessions, the women's health one, sob. I'm sad that I didn't get to join in on that. But we did make it in time for, obviously, to register our badge. And we joined the Albion welcome reception, Albion VC. Thank you, Molly and Christoph, for hosting us. And also the welcome party, which was a sight to behold. James, how was day zero for you?
It was good, yeah. The airport was funny. I just listened to, I don't know if anyone listened to the Modern Wisdom podcast by Chris Williams, was it Williamson? Episodes are a bit hit and miss, but listen to a really good one of that. So time passed pretty quickly for me too. But yeah, health broke the airport. That was quite funny. But yeah, day zero, it was good. It was a shame that we didn't get to those sessions, but from what I've heard, those sessions, no one was really expecting that many people to turn up on day zero, but of course everyone was really keen. So they only had a couple of things on, but apparently it was absolutely packed, standing room only, to get into this couple of what felt like kind of extra panels that have been put on just to sort of placate the people that were there a bit early. But there's people literally queuing outside at 12 p.m, banging the doors down to get in. So clearly a lot of excitement and anticipation for health. So that was day zero. But yeah, enjoyed getting a nice night's sleep and ready for the first proper day.
And for those of you who don't know, as I said, Health Europe, the very first Health Europe, was hosted in Amsterdam, and actually in a really lovely part of the city. I've never been to Amsterdam. I didn't know what to expect. And so they chose a location I thought really well. It was easy to get to from the airport. And yeah, some really nice areas to explore around, gave us definitely good vibes for Amsterdam. And what they also had was a official conference hotel, which was a 3-minute walk from the location, the main venue. And that was absolutely awesome. That was brilliant logistical planning from them, because it meant that you saw a lot of people over breakfast. We bumped into people in the lift. And that was kind of when most people were saying it was a great hotel, did a great breakfast. That was a big talking point for lots of us who were staying there. Excellent buffet breakfast, everything from the usual healthy fare all the way through to sweets, cake and waffles, of which many people are apparently taking photos to send home to their children. So I don't know what that says about parenting, teasing with waffles, but hey ho. But it was really convenient, and something that actually just made the whole conference experience, certainly for us, much easier. And you didn't have to worry about transport. Two things actually they did on transport, which I thought were cool, were that they had free bikes that you could hire for the duration of the conference as well. We didn't realise till the last day, and I'm a bit disappointed we missed out on that. I'm told that being knocked over by a bike in Amsterdam is a rite of passage, and frankly, I'm surprised that I didn't manage that, because that's usually pretty up my street. But also they gave you free tickets for their underground as well, so you could navigate the city at will. But as James said, we were tucked up in bed early for the first night, having been to those first drinks. So Albion reception was really nice. It was great to see lots of people who we already knew, but actually met lots of new faces as well. And I think that was great to kind of set the tone early, because I think we often find in the UK that we end up talking to the same people, which we love, of course, at events. But it's nice to branch out a little bit, which was awesome. And actually someone we bumped into had only heard about the event the week before at another event he went to, got FOMO and just booked a ticket and came over, which I love that spontaneity. I wish I could live my life like that. And just to give you a flavour for the welcome party, it was in, I forget the name, but it was in the Amsterdam Museum. It was truly spectacular. It was a beautiful mix of people in the black tie, in their tuxedos, in their beautiful outfits, and then people like me in their trainers. It was very, very cool, but no one was out of place. Everyone was just having a good time. Some good music. It felt very much like we were, well, at a very good party, I would say. And the food was also great. None of these like mini canapes. You got a full-on bowl of food. So I spent a lot of time wrestling the waiting staff to make sure I got plenty of that and got to sample all the food. But I think that got people really excited and energized for the day. And then we had a lovely walk back to the hotel. Got to see some of Amsterdam and the canals.
It does sound like this is sponsored content for health, but just to be clear, it's not. Like this.
It's not. We're just really excited about it.
This is a genuine. It's a genuine reaction.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So James, you were speaking, and there was so much content. It was actually quite overwhelming. That was one thing I would say, is that there was so much. It was really difficult to prioritize. So I actually didn't end up getting to that much, because I would be walking to a session and then bump into somebody and then having a conversation and missing what I was intending to go and see. That's, good and bad. But you were speaking, James. So how was like the preparation and lead into your session? You had some very, very cool guests
I did.
who, well, I am now definitely following on Instagram, not even just LinkedIn, because they were so good. But how was that for you? How did you find your session?
It was cool. So I did a social media panel, and it was like social media and healthcare. Obviously, that's something that we've been doing lots and lots and lots of for quite a long time. But it was more about the rise of creators and what that's doing for healthcare. So you've got clinician creators, you've got patient creators, you've got brands creating online as well. And all of the above are doing mainly, I'd say, a good job of educating. So with Public Health England, for example, going down the pan, there's this sort of gap for educating the public, which the social media platforms have kind of filled, because there is now a business model for individuals that want to create high quality content to basically amass a following and receive reward for that financially if they do well enough, which is a really interesting concept. But of course, that is not a perfect model. The social media platforms themselves value not necessarily the more academic, evidence-based, correct content. They value entertainment, and actually that forces creators into this space where if they do want to make impact and they are good actors in the space, they have to learn to be entertaining. shout out Dr. Disney, who was on the panel, who has made his content incredibly entertaining and interesting, largely based on musical theatre. But this is what is very, very, very interesting, that once you do amass that following, you then are able to create impact. And obviously, Dr. Karan Rajan is someone that you and I both know well, Jessica, and he talks about this a lot, that, you have to put in the hard yards, you have to put in the reps, you have to amass that following, and you do that over time, but then the rewards can come. And actually, it really is a really interesting space for what is a new version of public health. Obviously, there are bad actors in the space as well. There's misinformation. We talked about things that, for example, YouTube, like Vishal at YouTube Health is doing with the health shelf. I know that's had a lot of airtime, and it's like, where does the responsibility lie? And actually, if we're going to be in a world where healthcare content exists, we have to all accept responsibility on all sides of that. One particularly interesting thing that I hadn't really considered until I did the prep call with those guys was that when clinicians and patients are creating online, and to be fair, when brands are creating online, but particularly patients and clinicians, where you've got a lot of anecdotal information from, let's say, the patient talking about their own personal experience, it can form a really deep connection. It doesn't have to be evidence-based. Evidence-based information is fine. It's good. It's useful. But it's not the only thing that's relevant. Anecdotal information is also incredibly relevant. That own personal patient's experience of their stoma bag, for example, and how they dress, or how they develop their confidence, or how, like, all of these things are very personal. And actually, it's important to give that personal information as well, even though that's not necessarily evidence-based. The anecdotal is incredibly important. But by building that connection to people, you can get a really interesting comments section where it kind of needs moderating too, because people with certain conditions or very emotive about a certain topic can be throwing information down in there that people that are really keen to find a solution to their problem can follow. So when someone just puts even just a comment in there about, oh, this herbal tea worked for me, or putting this there worked for me, or whatever it is, like, that might not necessarily be the right information or good information. It might be misinformation. And actually, the spread of misinformation, not just through the platform's responsibility to promote the good stuff and downgrade the bad, actually there's responsibility even on the owners of those channels, as patients, as clinicians, to look at the comments and perhaps even moderate to some extent, or to even a large extent. Is it the responsibility of the creator to moderate that in a really big way? Difficult when you're at 10 million followers, but perhaps easier when you're a couple of thousand. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that we talked about, and like the rise of social media in healthcare, we're not going to stop it. We just have to be mindful of it and decide how we're going to go about it, assign the responsibility accordingly. And there are a lot of rewards for everyone at the other end, because just the speed of information that can spread, the speed that the information can spread, and the impact that can have is awesome.
Yeah, definitely. And I really valued hearing that patient creator perspective. I think from the work that we do, we're really used to hearing the kind of clinical creator perspective, and we're no stranger to the debate around, should every clinician be creating content? And I think my conclusion of that, from being a part of these conversations and listening into these conversations, is that no, they shouldn't. But one thing I really liked from Dr. Disney, and by the way, Disney and healthcare, the crossover we never knew that we needed. So good. But what he said was that actually creating content is about communicating, and from a clinician perspective, not enough time is spent training and educating people around communicating, and how actually it's a really good way of upskilling people, because the fundamentals are the same as the fundamentals of purely communicating. Because if you think about it, when you're creating content, you're looking for what resonates with your audience. You're trying to give them what they need, whilst also being, I guess, engaging and authentic in that conversation and that delivery, but also making sure that you're delivering the correct information. And I guess adapting that information depending on who your audience is or who that message is really focused to, which isn't a great deal different from when you're sat in a consultation room having a conversation with, someone, whether it's a parent or a patient themselves. And he said that those were such valuable lessons that have really helped him in his clinical practice. So I really appreciated that. But I think one of the things that also stood out to me from that discussion was the power of the comment section, as you said, and actually how it shows that we're all influencers in our own right in many ways, particularly in these spaces where you have people who really are searching for information and ideas and inspiration and often validation. That actually you could have 2 followers but comment on a post that is, relevant or has perhaps a lot of traction and a lot of discussion, and your views are seen and heard. And you don't necessarily get that feedback, but I hadn't really thought about how powerful that could be, because you don't get that feedback loop. And so it also goes to show there is something challenging in some respects about, having that power, I guess, and making sure that just as a good citizen, you are communicating with well intentions and understanding the consequences of the things that you do and say. And I guess on social media, things last. They end up having heritage. And I guess outside of healthcare, like, we are learning that. I saw a Facebook memory this morning and I was like, okay, wow, that was me 15 years ago. It wasn't actually me 15 years ago. It's someone else who posted on my behalf on Facebook. And it always shocks me. Sometimes it makes me laugh, often makes me cringe, but it lasts and it's there. And again, another point that all of the speakers mentioned was that you can be delivering the correct information at a particular moment in time, but things move on. And so you have to be responsible for making sure that you're validating yourself and you're checking yourself as creators, updating information, and providing, not necessarily redoing entire content, but you can add updates now to captions and all of that kind of thing, and signposting the fact that, newer information developments, data research is now available, thinking has changed, and that sort of thing. And so I guess from that perspective, it also shows like how complex and time consuming it can be, and the huge amount of responsibility it is when you're creating, not just creating content generally. I think any content creator probably experiences that to an extent, but when it has consequences for people in this way, the weight it has so much more gravitas, I think, and there's so much more to consider. And so it was great learning from me. And I really never thought I would see musical theatre come to Healthtech. And I think there's a space for some new show. So maybe Health will do that next year. If not, maybe that's something we need to look into, James. I know that I'm very much up for it.
I think, it goes to show, I think, that healthcare content creation, like whether you call it content creation, whether you call it at the other end, public health is another way of describing it as well. It feels to me that there's a discipline to this. There are sets of rules. There are codes of conduct. And we joked about it on stage. Like, are we going to see like a Royal College of social media, a Royal College of content creation, or is this going to be an offshoot of the Royal College of public health? All these different things. But it's true, and I think what you said about communication skills is interesting. I mean, as clinicians, we do a communication skills module at medical school, and I remember learning about. You sort of look academically at breaking bad news. You look academically at like a one-to-one GP consultation or a history, and you learn about things about voice and about body language, and you learn some of these things. It's interesting though that you're right. What we talked about, what Dr. Disney talked about, was like these new kind of modern communication skills that layer on top of that, which are about engagement and about capturing attention and keeping attention and all these ways of actually becoming almost like a good orator of health information, like you would have seen, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of years ago, or whatever. Like, you know, the clinicians of those days were perhaps orators like one to many, delivering health information and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's an interesting new collection of skills that's like, can you capture someone's attention with scientific information?
So one of the other sessions that I went to, so Philips every year launch the Future Health Index report, and they chose Health to launch their global insights for this year, which meant that I was lucky enough to be invited along to the press briefing to hear a bit more about it and hear from some of the experts, clinical experts, to kind of comment on the data, and also the Chief Innovation Officer at Philips to talk about how they approached it and some of those exciting data points that are helping to tell a story for what is happening in healthcare and what we think will happen in healthcare. And it was very cool. They did an announcement on one of the stages, and then we went up to a little press briefing room, which they newscast, I think live on LinkedIn or something. And so me and a little gaggle of journalists listened in, got to ask some questions. But I thought I would share some of the data from that because it was super interesting, and it's a very impressive cohort of people who were surveyed. So they spoke to, it's the 9th year they've done it. They spoke to 3,000 health leaders from across 14 different countries. And it is the largest global survey of its kind. I think, you know, on this podcast, obviously we talk a lot about what's going on in the UK because that's where we're based, and obviously to an extent Europe and the US, but it was really cool to get this kind of broader global picture. And it uncovered some interesting things, which some of them left me scratching my head a little bit. The first one was around AI, and I know Ahuti and Hugh on a previous episode of Pigeon Podcast have actually talked about AI washing, and is it something that healthcare is falling victim to? And this particular piece of data made me question that even more, because it said that, bear in mind they interviewed 3,000 health leaders, 99% of those said that they implemented at least one type of AI for clinical decision support. Now, I appreciate that my bubble is quite small, but that definitely is not reflective of the cohort of people that I know, and the health leaders that I'm aware of, and what we're kind of hearing on the ground. And I think clinical decision support is obviously something that's very specific, and 99% is an almost perfect percentage. But actually, one of the clinical leads, who is Dr. Marlies Shivan, who was Professor of Surgery and Chair of Digital Health at Amsterdam, she, I think, articulated some of my thinking, which was that she doesn't think that that's necessarily accurate, and that, not that it's not accurate, but it's not necessarily a true reflection, in the sense that it's maybe a misunderstanding around what AI is and how it's used, and perhaps it reflects people's use of things like automation rather than truly AI. Now, I haven't looked into the detail to understand how they've categorized or defined AI. So I think that would probably give me a few more clues as to exactly maybe how they reached that statistic. But I thought it was interesting because it conflicts with lots of what we hear out in the space. But in terms of intention, I thought it was super positive, where they reported that 85% of health leaders were currently already investing or planning to invest in generative AI. Now, I think that's really cool, but also, again, I think that it misses a step a little bit, in the sense that we know generative AI is super new. We know that the regulation around AI broadly, but also generative AI, is quite hazy. And so, you know, from some of the companies we work with and our friends out in the space, we know that actually the safe clinical deployment of technologies like generative AI, which are very black box, it is really difficult to do. So it's encouraging that people are exploring how it can perhaps benefit health systems and healthcare professionals and patients as well. But again, there's additional context needed to make sure that obviously we are deploying it in a safe and effective way. And I think kind of echoing those concerns a little bit, 87% of people said that they were concerned around data bias of AI applications, and that they would be widening disparities in health outcomes. And for me, that stat is actually encouraging, because it goes to show that people are appropriately skeptical of AI and data, and not just blindly seeing something sparkly and thinking that it could or should be deployed into a healthcare space. But obviously data bias is something we for sure really do need to tackle in a very definitive and robust way, because those risks need to be properly explained, because if you can't properly explain them, you can't mitigate for them. So yeah, it was encouraging to see that there was appropriate skepticism and enthusiasm around those kind of new technologies. I could go on for ages, but it was a really interesting conversation, and I'm always appreciative of data, especially when it comes to us from scale. I think the last time I was on here, I was whinging about a research study that was done on 20 people, and questioning how many conclusions you can really draw from that. But, it even goes to show that when you are collecting data at scale, that actually there is nuance and context that can influence perhaps the insights that come out of that, and they do need to therefore be taken with a pinch of salt. But I really enjoyed that conversation and being able to be a part of that media launch. And I think from a kind of corporate perspective, Philips was one of the few big companies there. There was obviously Microsoft, Google Health, and a couple of pharma companies like Bayer, for example, Novo Nordisk. And I think that we'll see more of those next year, and potentially, more companies will be looking to capitalize on that kind of moment in time to be launching some of their big announcements. But they had announcements from lots of different companies that were not necessarily at Philips scale, but it was nice to see that it was being used as a moment in time for, health tech and healthcare news. I think it's a great way to use events as well, where you have a lot of people engaged on certain topics, for example, and a great way to create a splash. So it's definitely something that would be cool to see more of at events. But my caveat is make sure that it's definitely news and not just a bit blah. Because I guess from like a journalist perspective, and I speak from our perspective with Pigeon, there has to be a genuine news hook. You can't just kind of pull a news story from nowhere and it just be that someone's necessarily speaking at a conference or something like that, which is what we see. Or someone may be talking about a potential announcement, but actually it's just really frustrating because it's very fluffy and they're not giving any detail because they don't have the authorization to do that yet. So yeah, that was good. I enjoyed that. But James, were there any other sessions that you went to that you enjoyed?
Yeah, one thing that I mentioned to the organisers, they sent like a thing around like asking for feedback and stuff, and obviously like there's so much good about the event. And one thing that I think a few people mentioned is that they found really useful, like quite focused networking where it happened. And so a good example was I was hanging out at the women's health stage, and there was a panel there on healthcare for LGBTQ people. And there was a startup on stage, there was an investor on stage, there was quite an interesting panel. A few of the concepts that I hadn't really considered, one of which was often when people talk about healthcare for the LGBTQ community, they say like, oh, it should be as good as it is for everyone else, and sort of aspiring for it to be like the same as for everyone else. And it's like the concept that the panel discussed was like, that's actually not ideal, because the LGBTQ community, patients in that community often have similar constellations of things with their physical health and mental health, and actually clinicians that are well versed in that type of healthcare can start to spot things earlier. They can be more preventative, they can be more proactive, and some really interesting statistics around the sheer volume of people in that community that feel judged by their healthcare practitioner, that have had to change healthcare practitioner because they feel like their choices are judged and all that sort of stuff. And it was a really, really, really interesting panel that I learned a genuinely huge amount from. Straight after that panel, there was like they sort of they signaled it as like a pride celebration, where basically it was like drinks and food, and people just hung out at the stage. And what it meant, though, is that there was really focused networking around the topics that had just been discussed, and actually it gave this real, as I say, this real focus, and people could go deep on that topic. And for someone like me who could learn a great deal there, I found it really useful then bouncing from person to person and just asking some genuine questions that I had, trying to actually learn about this one thing without it being quite weird. Like I couldn't have just gone up and made any assumptions about people and just asked a lot of these questions like in a general networking space. Whereas like, because that was very focused and straight after that panel, like a lot of the conversations that were more specific felt a lot safer. Really enjoyed that kind of hour, a couple of hours. And it just made me think like where you can frame networking either with a panel or even just with someone at the start, like announcing a topic or some questions or whatever, just giving people permission to really go deep on a topic in that environment, I think it was just really cool. It was just really useful. And I think, yeah, that I found enjoyable and would love to see more of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? That actually, that's what those difficult topics, and they shouldn't be difficult, but they are difficult, particularly when you're from outside of that community and wanting to understand it better and support better and that kind of thing. It creates a safe space, and it goes to show that actually that's why we need focus on those things. And I think health had a women's health stage, a huge heart-shaped stage right in the middle, and I really appreciated that nod to women's health, but I think there was such a brilliant emphasis on diversity, particularly gender diversity and LGBTQ+. There was an Eid lunch as well. There was a BAME breakfast or a BAME lunch.
Prayer rooms and all that sort of stuff.
Prayer rooms, family rooms, all of that kind of thing. And I think that attention to detail matters and is appreciated. And it might seem like a small thing, but not only does it help people who are part of those communities, but it helps all of us who are not do better in a really safe way, where we can drop a bit of that anxiety around how do we actually approach it, and how do we learn more in a way that's not going to offend somebody. And again, I think that's really great learning for even people like us as we think about hosting events on clearly a much smaller scale. But for anyone thinking about how they curate space around groups of people, and how to allow for the conversations that we need to be having in order to make progress in healthcare for everybody, and truly tackle health inequity. Because actually, we had a conversation at an event that we hosted with Newman a few days before we left, which was about men's health, and the big takeaway from that was actually there isn't space to talk about men's health in a meaningful way because people are scared to talk about it, both from the perspective of patriarchy, but also men don't talk about health, and so you have to do something focused and dedicated in order to support those people in that space, but also for us all to better understand it and move it forward. So that's definitely kind of an ongoing theme, I guess, that's come out for me in the spaces where we've been over the last few weeks, which is great. Hopefully we see more of that. So one of the things that we always think about very intentionally is, of course, the people on stage, and the speakers actually that Health had. They had 50% gender split. They also had 80% C-suite, but there were lots of clinicians, and there's definitely a diverse range of perspectives, even extending to debates, which I think is awesome. But I guess the other part of that, and almost in some respects more importantly, because I think it's forgotten sometimes, is the people in the room and how you curate the opportunity to make what comes after or around whatever's happened on stage really meaningful and valuable without it feeling structured and awkward. And I guess that fundamentally is about community, isn't it? But how do you create meaningful discussion and network and community, and making sure that you have representation in the room. And one of the things that really struck me was the opportunity for conversation. I think I mentioned earlier that I missed out on so much good content because wherever you're walking, someone's always grabbing you, catching you, whether it's someone you know or someone you don't know. And as I said, we had such great conversations with everywhere from lifts to I joined the running club on the last morning and had such a great time. Also got myself a Petunia the unicorn. We managed to come home with 3, despite the fact that they were very exclusive. Because I turned up to the running club, which, tempt me with food, tempt me with a soft toy, I'm in. And also the Survivors barbecue. Nuno the dog has definitely made use of one of those. So thank you, health team. He's very grateful.
You can actually just about see Nuno's in the background of your frame.
Maybe if I
just through the window. It's through the window. For those on YouTube, you could if you squint and believe, you can see it in the background.
There's a unicorn in the garden. That's got Nuno. I think it's probably going to chase after it now. But yeah, like the opportunity just to have conversation in a formal way. So you could use the app for networking, which was great. But I guess also the social events that went around the edges, because they obviously put a lot of thought into that too. And for me, I think that was almost where most of the value was, because everyone's a bit more chilled. There's food. I think good conversations often happen around food. Yes, the libertines were there. I think that was a highlight for many. I definitely got my video so that I could say that I was there. But yeah, there was just like good opportunity to meet with people and catch up with people. And we definitely extended our network and met some awesome people who I'm really excited to keep in touch with. And I also heard from lots of people that from an investment perspective, it was super valuable because there were a huge amount of investors in attendance, and that doesn't happen very often for starters. But also, there are lots of companies raising at the moment. So from that perspective, the opportunity to connect with investors in a much more relaxed way and space was super valuable. And there were people who had managed to connect with investor contacts who had gone cold previously, or they hadn't managed to get hold of, and actually have a really productive discussion. I heard that as a consistent theme, actually. And I think that's, a pretty impressive achievement at a time like now where everyone is gunning for investment. So I'm sure that their calendars were pretty busy with, scheduled meetings and all of that kind of thing. But it went to show that actually, if you didn't manage to catch someone on the app and by scheduling a meeting with them, that, the chances are you'll bump into them or someone like them later, and be able to have a good discussion with them, and a productive conversation that allows you to kind of follow up. And you probably bump into them 3 more times through the week. So by the end of the event, you've got a pretty good, they will at least recognize you, know who you are, and you have the opportunity to kind of reconnect and continue building that relationship. So yeah, I just really loved the serendipity that I think was really central to so much of the week, but I think was probably pretty intentional in terms of how it was set up. I think, a learning point for us is that sometimes it's not what happens around the event is just as important as what happens on stage. So, definitely something to think about. And another thing, I guess, like we attend a lot of events. I think lots of people thought that health might replace events that already exist. And my feeling on it is that actually it was very different to any event that I've been to. I think the European feel and inclusivity community was great, but I just think it offers something very different. I don't think it actually replaces certainly any events that I've been to. I think there's definitely space for everything that is in the calendar right now. I think it probably will have given a lot of us things to think about for how we level up, and really raise the value of those opportunities, particularly around how we initiate like sales conversations, because whilst there was like an exhibition floor, I didn't feel like I was being pitched to all the time. No one tried to sell me a scanner or a fax machine, so that was a big win. And yeah, I just think that it will add a lot of fuel to the fire in a really positive way. And I think we'll see some really awesome things from a lot of events across the next 12 months as we then lead into next year's event. But James, what was the kind of overriding sentiment you were left with as we reboarded the plane back at Amsterdam, and fortunately didn't have to stand in a 90-minute passport queue on the way back?
I think that people have a few resources that they have to give to something like this. They have their time, they have their energy, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert will depend on how much of that energy, and they have their money too, because they have to pay for a ticket, and there's also opportunity cost of being there if you run a startup or a business, that kind of thing. So people have to look at events and they have to make a judgment call on, is this worth it? Now, we're all human. And, you know, when you listen to particularly Henry in the UK, like talking about health, there's the recognition that people are humans and they like enjoying themselves. They like having fun. They like well-designed stuff. Not everyone is in corporate work mode the whole time. And so health's an example of just meeting people where they are in that as well. And I think broadly in the world and in the startup world, we like this level of informality now, and business is done, deals are done, not even in spite of, but probably because of that informality, that we have the chance to get to know each other. Deals are done based on trust, like all these different things. And so when people are thinking about where they're going to put their time, their energy, their money, their other resources, and gamble with that opportunity cost, well, health is an example of something that gives you an element of fun and that you want to be there, and puts all that business stuff within a framework that you can also enjoy yourself. And so that's going to be a new bar, frankly. You know, high quality content and enjoying yourself to make it fun is a new bar if you're going to do a 4-day event abroad and expect people to be out of their business for that amount of time. So I just think that they're obviously a team that has listened and observed what the market wants and needs. They've gone and delivered a version of it that they will probably keep improving on. We all hear and know about the chaos of Vegas and how like grand that is and all that sort of stuff, right? So not that we'd probably think of it in the same way in Europe, because we are perhaps more reserved, but it will be horses for courses or unicorns for rainbows in that sense. But yeah, what I look forward to is a new bar of what an event should be, I guess. And, you know, with all the events that we do at SomX, like we're always thinking of this stuff very proactively. We pay a disproportionate amount of time, money, and other resource on the quality of the content and how interesting the content should be on stage, the people on it, the things we're talking about, the questions that we're answering, all that sort of stuff. And making sure that we curate a room that has interesting people that want to talk to each other and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, if it is next door to a bar or a pub or whatever, that you naturally know people are going to move to, that's a good thing. But as I say, it just ups the bar on that sort of stuff. And actually, yeah, brand is something that I can talk about as well. Like you know, I've now here, for people watching on YouTube, I've got my petunia, I've got my jigsaw of my face, I've got the health water bottle and stuff. Like, we could talk about visual aesthetic, we talk about brand, like the visuals, the design, the brand that health kind of gives out is of this more fun but well polished outfit. And so the results that people get in Vegas, in Europe, it's just going to contribute to the brand, isn't it? So I think there's a lot that all startups can learn from that when with the attention to detail and all that sort of stuff, however that's reflected in your product, which for them is an event, that carries through into your brand. So yeah, interesting few days, really enjoyed it.
I guess kind of in summary, we often say that you can't be everything to everyone. And
yeah,
whilst I don't think that health was everything to everyone, there was something for everyone. And I think that's incredibly difficult to achieve. And it does take a 4-day event to do that. It's impossible to do that in, a 2-hour evening event. But I think that the commitment to achieving that, so that everyone felt included and got value from it, was awesome. And I just came away not feeling as exhausted as I usually would if I was going to a 4-day event. And I was definitely very grateful for that, because I enjoyed my weekend after too. So I guess to wrap up, James, the question we all want to know the answer to: will you be going back next year?
Yes, as long as I've got the time, the energy, the money, all the rest of it. Or we can get our hands on some free tickets somehow, perhaps by being so nice in this podcast episode, etc.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully, yes.
Nice. Well, I hope that I'll be there too, and I hope to see lots more of you there. But we've got a whole 12 months before we get there, so I'm sure I'll see you all in between times. I'm sure we'll be doing plenty of events ourselves. So there's lots of opportunity for us to talk more about what makes a good event and put some of this stuff into practice. But thanks for being a great traveling pal and conference mate. It's always nice to be able to share the social battery energy with somebody, or at least agree that neither of us have any, and depart at a time that we feel is appropriate, without making it feel like we have to stay for hours longer than we really want to. But yeah, a great week, and we'll be back next week and we'll talk about some more of the news. I lied when we said we might talk about some of the news stories. We didn't, but it was nice catching up about health. So thanks, James, and see you all next week.